The kitchen smelled like wood smoke, stale grease, and desperation. Clara Mae Carter stood at the stove with sleeves rolled up, apron too big for her small frame, and her dark hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. The frying pan hissed as she tried again to flip the flapjacks without burning them. It was her first morning alone in the kitchen of Dry Creek Ranch, and everything felt too big. The iron skillet, the roaring stove, the stack of orders she'd scribbled down from the bathroom. Bunkhous. Outside the window, morning light crept across the plains, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. A dozen hungry cowboys were about to stomp into the dining hall, expecting hot food before a long day riding fence lines. And Clara, just 16, just a girl, was all they had. Her mama, Sarah Carter, had been the ranch cook for nearly 6 years. But last week, a fever took hold that hadn't let go. She coughed all night, barely touched her water, and her hands shook too badly to even hold a spoon. The doctor from town had shaken his head and said rest was the only cure. And so Clara stepped in. There was no choice. The Carters didn't have family nearby. They didn't own land, no savings. If Clara didn't keep cooking, they'd be out on the street by month's end. The door slammed open behind her. A gust of dust and bootsteps filled the space. "Smells like something's burnin'. Girl," came the voice of Cowboy Lyle, one of the loudest and meanest of the bunch. "Ain't no one told you how to cook?" Clara clenched her jaw. "If you don't like it, Lyle, you can cook your own breakfast." That earned a laugh from a few of the men, and a raised eyebrow from the one standing behind them all, Rhett McAllister, the owner of Dry Creek Ranch. Tall, quiet, and sharp-eyed, Rhett didn't say much. Folks said he'd been a different man before his wife and child passed. Now he worked sunup to sundown, barely spoke to anyone, and kept to himself. He said nothing as he stepped in, just tipped his hat slightly at Clara and took a seat at the far end of the table. His silence weighed heavier than any insult. Clara moved fast, plating up the flapjacks, too dark on the bottom, soft on the top, then sliding bacon from the skillet. Her hands shook as she served each plate. She'd never cooked for this many men before, not without her mama guiding her, not with this much pressure. But she kept moving. She had to dot by the time she dropped the last plate in front of Rhett. Sweat soaked the back of her neck. He looked down at the food. Then, slowly, he picked up his fork and took a bite. The room went quiet. Clara stood, breath held. "It's edible," Rhett finally said. A few cowboys chuckled. But something about his tone wasn't mocking. It almost sounded ... respectful. She didn't answer, just nodded and returned to the kitchen, where the next batch of biscuits was already starting to smoke. That night, after the dinner dishes were scrubbed and stacked, Clara sat beside her mama's bed in the small cabin they shared behind the barn. "Mama, I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "They look at me like I'm nothin', like I'm just a girl who don't belong." Sarah opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was weak, raspy. "You are just a girl, but you're my girl. And you're stronger than you know. You hear me?" Clara swallowed. "I burned the biscuits twice. That rancher eat 'em?" "Yeah," Sarah smiled faintly. "Then they weren't so bad." Outside, Rhett stood alone on the porch of the big house, watching the smoke rise from the cookhouse chimney. He remembered the first time Sarah brought Clara to the ranch. Just a slip of a thing with a crooked braid and bare feet. Now she stood at that stove like she had something to prove, and maybe she did. He'd seen the way she held her chin when Lyle mocked her, the way her hands trembled, but she kept flipping pancakes anyway. Rhett didn't trust people easy, not anymore. But something about Clara Mae Carter told him she wasn't going to fold, and maybe, just maybe, the ranch needed someone like her. He wasn't sure yet, but he'd be watching closely. Clara Mae was up before the sun the next morning. her fingers raw from scrubbing pots the night before and her legs aching from standing all day. She didn't have time to care. The kitchen had to be hot, the dough had to rise, and the biscuits had to be better. She shoved a few sticks of wood into the stove, lit the fire, and opened the windows to let the night air out. The ranch was still asleep, but the prairie had already begun to glow with early dawn light. Chickens rustled in their coop, and somewhere far off, a coyote gave a lonely yip. She worked by memory, her mama's voice echoing in her head. Don't overwork the dough. Cold butter, not soft. Pat, don't roll. She followed every step exactly. Still, the first batch came out like hockey pucks. Clara sighed and tossed them to the barn dogs, who barked with approval. By the time the Cowboys came stomping in muddy boots, loud voices, sunburnt faces, Clara was halfway through her second batch. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned toward the stove just as one of them whistled. Well, well, the little miss survived a whole day with us roughnecks. It was Hank, one of the older hands, who smiled more than he spoke. Barely. Clara muttered, flipping bacon and praying it didn't burn. Got better biscuits today? Lyle called from the back. Or should we chew on last night's leather again? Clara's jaw tightened. She turned, holding the tray of fresh biscuits, and walked it right to the table. I baked these at 4 in the morning, she said, placing the basket in front of him. If you want to insult him, at least eat one first. That drew a few whistles and some hoots from the men. Lyle looked stunned but said nothing. He grabbed a biscuit and bit in, likely expecting to spit it out. Instead, he blinked. They single quotes Better, he muttered. Better than what? Clara asked sweetly. He grunted. Better than I expected. Clara turned, hiding her smirk as she went to plate the eggs. But she didn't miss the quiet chuckle from the head of the table, Rhett. McAllister himself. Rhett hadn't spoken a word when he entered that morning. He rarely did. He just nodded once at Clara when she handed him his plate. She noticed, though, that he took his coffee black, and he buttered his biscuit before he even touched the eggs. She didn't need him to say anything. She just needed that silence to not feel heavy. And today at DN single quotes T. By the time breakfast was over and the men were out on their horses, Clara was left alone with her thoughts and the sound of dishes clinking. She scrubbed the plates with a little less frustration and a little more purpose. That afternoon, Red appeared again. He stood in the kitchen doorway as she was peeling potatoes for supper. She hadn't heard him come in. Morning went smoother, he said simply. She nodded. Didn't burn the biscuits. He stepped inside slowly. Lyle give you trouble? Clara shook her head. Not any more than usual. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You stand up to him well. He's been kicked off 2 ranches for how he talks to women. That made her stop peeling. Then why's he still here? He knows cattle, Rhett replied. But I don't keep men who can't respect who they work beside. She didn't know what to say to that. You cooked a fine breakfast, he added, then straightened up. Let me know if anything's missing from the pantry. You'll have a fresh order in 2 days. Then he tipped his hat and left as quietly as he came. That night, Clara sat with her mama again. Sarah looked worse. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked, and her breath rattled with every exhale. Clara held her hand. Mama ... Rhett McAllister said I cooked a fine breakfast. Sarah's eyes fluttered open just a little. Did he now? He stood in the kitchen. Talked like he noticed me. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He should notice you. Clara blinked. Why? Sarah squeezed her hand weakly. Because you're more than just the cook's daughter now, Clara Mae. You're standing on your own feet. And for the first time since taking over her mama's job, Clara didn't feel like she was drowning. The biscuits were edible. The Cowboys were fed. And the quiet rancher had spoken. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. By dusk, the sky had turned to iron, and thunder rumbled low like the growl of an angry dog. Clara stood at the window of the small cabin she shared with her mama, staring out at the distant flashes of lightning over the ridge. Inside, the air felt thick and tense. Her mama lay in bed, skin pale and damp with fever. The doctor had come earlier that day and left a bottle of laudanum and a warning. If her breathing changes, send for me. Otherwise, keep her dry and warm. Dry was proving to be a problem. The roof over their cabin had always leaked a little when the rains came, but now, with the shingles loose and the wind howling, it sounded like 100 fists pounding on the walls. Water started dripping steadily from the corner above the hearth. Clara scrambled to pull a tin bucket under the leak. Then another as water began to seep from a new spot. The fire sputtered, struggling to stay lit. A gust of wind slammed the shutters open, sending in a spray of rain. She raced to close them, her hands trembling. The roof creaked loudly this time, and a board groaned above her. She looked up. A dark stain was spreading fast across the ceiling. "Mama?" she called, rushing to the bed. Her mama stirred, coughing weakly, but didn't respond. Clara grabbed the nearest blanket and tried to shield her from the damp. But then crack-a, sharp snap above, and part of the roof gave way with a crash. Rain poured through the opening like a broken dam. Clara cried out and threw her arms over her mama's body. Cold water soaked them both instantly. She didn't have time to think. She just ran dot boots splashing through the muddy yard, hair whipped. By wind, Clara sprinted through the darkness toward the main ranch house. Rain lashed her face as she climbed the steps and pounded on the front door. It opened in seconds. Rhett McAllister stood there, soaked himself, his shirt half buttoned and his hair dark with rain. Our roof fell in." Clara gasped, out of breath. "My mama, she's still inside." He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the slicker from the wall and followed her, sprinting across the yard as the wind howled louder. Lightning cracked the sky overhead. When they reached the cabin, Clara held the lantern high as Rhett climbed inside. The bed was soaked. Her mama's lips were blue. "We need to move her," Rhett said immediately. "Get blankets, hot water, now." Together, they carried Sarah barely conscious to the main house. Rhett led them upstairs, past the formal sitting rooms and the long, silent hallways of the old house, into a warm guest room that hadn't been used in years. Clara barely noticed the fine furniture or the velvet curtains. She just helped settle her mama into a dry bed, then rushed to stoke the fire. Rhett disappeared briefly and returned with more blankets, towels, and a hot water bottle. "I'll send someone to fetch the doctor again," he said. "You stay with her." "I will," Clara whispered, brushing damp hair from her mama's forehead. Before he left, Rhett paused at the door. His voice was quiet. "You should sleep here tonight, too. That cabin's no place to be." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Later that night, Clara sat alone beside the bed, her mama finally breathing evenly under layers of warm covers. The rain still beat against the windows, but it sounded softer now. Like the ranch itself had calmed. She pulled the old quilt around her shoulders and stared into the fireplace. Her hands were scraped. Her clothes were muddy. But her mama was safe, and they were dry, and for the first time since taking over the kitchen, she didn't feel so alone. Downstairs, Rhett stood by his own window, staring out at the soaked land. His boots were still wet. His mind, unusually, was not on cattle or fences, but on Clara Mae. She was young, yes, but she had grit he hadn't seen in years. When the roof collapsed, she didn't panic. She acted, and she ran straight to him, trusting he'd help. She reminded him of someone his late wife, maybe, or the woman he once hoped his daughter might become. The storm outside raged on, but inside, something had shifted. Something more than rain had broken through tonight. By the third morning after the storm, Clara felt like her heart had finally come out of her throat. The sun had returned, warm and golden, drying the muddy yard and lighting up the prairie with a clean shimmer. Her mama, still weak, slept peacefully in the guest bed Red had insisted they use. The doctor had stopped by again and said the fever was breaking. "A few more days," he murmured, "and she might just pull through." It was the best news Clara had heard in weeks. She nearly cried, but the work didn't stop. That morning she found herself in the ranch house pantry organizing shelves, wiping jars, and taking stock of supplies Red had asked her to check. The pantry was deep, lined with crates, barrels, and jars stacked neatly along wooden shelves. It smelled like dry herbs, cured ham, and wood polish. She was reaching for a bag of flour on the top shelf when her fingers brushed a tin box tucked far in the back, dusty, almost hidden. Curious, she pulled it down and sat cross-legged on the floor. Inside were letters, dozens of them, old, yellowed with time, tied together with faded blue string. She knew she shouldn't open them, but the top envelope was already torn. The handwriting was delicate and feminine. She peeked inside. "Rhett, we miss you more every day. The baby's walking now. She called you Pa yesterday." Clara blinked and gently laid the letter aside. Beneath it were a few photographs, black and white, edges curling with age. One showed Rhett, much younger, holding a laughing little girl. Another showed a woman, dark-haired, bright-eyed, smiling up at the camera with a gentleness Clara had never seen in him. Suddenly, the pantry door creaked. She spun around, heart pounding. Rhett stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes unreadable. "Was just," she started, scrambling to put the letters back. "I know what you were doing," he said quietly. He stepped inside and took the tin from her hands, holding it with a kind of reverence. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sank to a crate beside her, the tin resting in his lap. "Her name was Lydia," he said, staring at the photo of the smiling woman. "And that little girl, her name was Hope." Clara swallowed. "Your daughter?" He nodded. "They were everything. Lydia kept me grounded. Hope ... She made me believe in something again. Ranching ain't easy, but coming home to them made it worth it." "What happened?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Fire," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Barn went up. No one knows how it started. I was out on the South Range, 3 hours away. By the time I got back ... it was too late." Clara stared at the floor, stunned by the weight of his words. "I buried them under the cottonwood tree," Rhett continued. "Since then, this house has just been wood and stone. I didn't let anyone close. Didn't want to feel that again." He looked over at Clara then. "Until you came knocking on the door in the middle of a storm." She flushed. "I didn't know where else to go." "I know," he said. "And you didn't have to explain. You were doing what I didn't get the chance to save the person you love." Silence settled over them. A comfortable kind. After a while, he stood and placed the tin back on a high shelf. Clara rose too, brushing flour dust from her apron. "I didn't mean to pry," she said softly. He shook his head. "You weren't prying. You found something." "I meant to bury ... but maybe it was time someone else saw it." He moved toward the pantry door but stopped. "You remind me of Lydia sometimes. Not your looks, your fire. She never took a man's nonsense either." Clara gave a faint smile. "I get that from my mama." Rhett turned back slightly. "She's lucky to have you. This ranch is lucky too." He left without another word, leaving Clara standing among the shelves, heart pounding not with fear, but something warmer, something unexpected. That night, as she stirred the stew and watched the flames flicker in the hearth, Clara thought about the look in Rhett's eyes. It wasn't pain. Exactly, not anymore. It was memory. It was grief softened by time, and maybe, just maybe. A small sliver of trust. She'd seen the side of Rhett McAllister no cowboy on that ranch ever had, and she knew one thing for certain now. This place wasn't just where she worked at, it was where her life was starting to change. The ranch felt different now. Clara could feel it in the way the men looked at her when she brought out the morning coffee. There was a stiffness, a silence just long enough to notice. Some of the cowboys still nodded respectfully, still called her Miss Clara and thanked her for her cooking, but others, especially Jed Talbert, had turned cold. Jed was one of the older hands. Broad-shouldered, with a permanent sneer, he'd been at Dry Creek longer than most. Clara never liked the way he looked at her, too long, too calculating. And now, ever since she'd moved into the ranch house with her sick mama and Rhett had taken a visible interest in her. Yet's mood had darkened into something sharper. It wasn't just that he didn't like her, it was that he resented her. It started with small things. A crate of potatoes delivered late. The kitchen coal left damp. Then the chuckwagon supply list was mysteriously lost, forcing Clara to improvise meals for nearly a week. Rhett noticed the change too. Clara could see it in the way his eyes scanned the yard, how his jaw tensed whenever he passed the bunkhouse, but he hadn't said anything yet. Neither had she until the night Jed crossed the line. The dining hall was nearly empty. Dinner had long since ended, and Clara was wiping down the long wooden table, lost in thought. Most of the men had turned in, but Jed lingered, leaning against the doorframe with a toothpick between his teeth, and that same ugly smirk on his face. "You sure are getting comfortable in that big house," he drawled. "Cooking for the boss? Sleeping under his roof? That how girls move up these days?" Clara's hand stopped mid-swipe. She looked up, eyes cold. "I'm cooking and cleaning like I always have. And I'm sleeping in the ranch house because my mama's too sick to haul across the mud every night." Jed took a slow step into the room. "That what we're calling it?" Her blood froze. She stood tall, tightening her grip on the rag. "Whatever filth you're implying, I'd keep it behind your teeth," she said. Rhett McAllister gave me a roof, not a bed. Jed laughed low in his throat. "Well, reckon if you ever get tired of playing house with the boss man, you let a real man show you how it's done." He reached out and touched the hem of her sleeve. Before she could slap his hand away, Rhett's voice thundered from the doorway. "Take your hand off her." Jed froze. Clara turned. Rhett stood in the shadows, arms crossed, his face like iron. Jed dropped his hand slowly. "We were just talking." "No," Rhett said. "You were out of line, and you've been out of line for weeks. Come on, boss, you're letting a girl run this place now? You really letting her play queen of the kitchen and tell you how things go?" Rhett didn't flinch. "She's not playing anything. She's working, and you're done." The room went still. "You're firing me?" Jed laughed, stunned. "Over her? Over your mouth, your behavior, and your disrespect for a woman who's done more for this ranch in 2 months than you've done all year." Yet's face darkened. "You'll regret this, McAllister. You and your little cook." Rhett stepped forward. "If you ever come back through that gate, you'll meet me with a rifle in my hands." "Get off my land." Jed left that night. Packed up, cussed out half the bunkhouse, and rode off into the dark. But the wake of his exit rippled across Dry Creek Ranch like thunder. Some men respected what Rhett had done. Others whispered. Clara heard them in the halls. "She's got the boss," wrapped around her finger. All this fuss over a girl and some biscuits. But she kept her head high. She walked the same paths, worked the same hours, scrubbed twice as hard. She didn't want a favor. She wanted respect. Rhett said nothing about the confrontation after that night, but something shifted between them. When he passed her in the kitchen, his nod lingered a little longer. When she brought him his supper, he looked her in the eye. He wasn't treating her like a cook anymore. He was treating her like someone who belonged. That evening, As Clara stood on the back porch with the wind tugging at her apron, she watched the sky turn lavender above the fields. For the first time, she didn't feel like a girl fighting for scraps. She felt like someone worth standing up for. And deep down, she knew Yet's threat wouldn't be the last, but whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The ranch was. Quiet the next morning, the kind of hush that settles in after a storm has passed, though no clouds hung overhead. Jed was gone, but the tension he stirred up still clung to the air like dust. Clara had risen early, as usual, tending the stove and slicing peaches for cobbler. She worked with her sleeves rolled up and her mind elsewhere, half on the stew bubbling in the pot, half on Rhett McAllister. He hadn't said much since he fired Jed. Not at dinner, not the day after. Not even that morning when she brought him his coffee and fresh bread. He'd just taken the tray, nodded once, and walked off toward the barn. It left Clara uneasy. Not because she expected praise, but because she'd never been able to read him so clearly before. He was a man of few words, but lately, even his silence felt heavy. So when Rhett knocked on the kitchen door just before noon, Clara jumped. She opened it, wiping her hands on her apron. "You need something, Mr. McAllister?" He looked like he'd just come from the pasture, dust on his boots, gloves tucked into his belt, but his face was unusually serious. "I need a word," he said. In the parlor, Clara blinked. The parlor? He never invited anyone into that part of the house. Not the hands. Not even the foreman. It was the quiet, polished room with lace curtains and polished furniture, the one that still smelled like a woman's perfume from a life Rhett had locked away. Heart thudding, she followed him inside. He motioned to the settee, then remained standing, arms crossed. "I've been thinking," he began, "about you. About this ranch. About your place here." Clara tried not to fidget. "I've tried to pull my weight. I know it's not much compared to the men, but you've done more than most of them." His voice was flat, direct. "And not just in the kitchen. You've kept your mama alive. You stood your ground when the men didn't respect you. And you didn't break, even when it would have been easier to walk away." She didn't answer. She wasn't sure where he was going. He walked to the window and stared out. "This ranch needs someone steady. Someone who can hold it together when the wind kicks up. I built this place with my wife, and when I lost her, I stopped building. Anything at all." Then he turned to face Clara. "And now I'm offering you a deal." Clara stiffened. "You stay," he said, "not just as the cook. Not just as the daughter of an employee. I'll pay you a proper wage, give you a say in the house and the business. I'll help you get schooling books, supplies, everything. You'll be a partner in how this place runs." She stared at him, wide-eyed. "A partner? In time?" he said. "But first a resident, a student, a woman under my protection. No more sleeping on the edge of a cot beside your mama. No more carrying this alone." She felt her throat tighten. "You want to take care of me? I want to give you a future," he said. "And I'm not offering out of pity, Clara. You've earned it." "But why?" she whispered. "I'm just a girl who can cook." "No, you're not," he said firmly. "You're a woman growing into herself. You've got grit, smarts. You remind me what it's like to believe in something." Again, tears welled in her eyes, uninvited and unspoken. "I don't need an answer today," he added. "But know this. Whatever folks around here say, whatever whispers blow through this ranch, I'll stand beside you." That night, Clara sat with her mama in the soft light of the bedroom lamp. Her mama's voice was thin but clearer than it had been in days. "You're quiet," Sarah murmured. "What's in your mind, baby girl?" Clara hesitated. Then she told her everything. Her mama listened, one hand resting gently on Clara's. When the story was done, Sarah smiled weakly. "Offered you more than a job," she said. "He offered you respect. And you ought to take it, Clara. Don't let fear make you small." I don't want to owe him, Clara whispered. You don't, her mama replied. He sees what I see. You're not just filling shoes. You're macking your own path. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass dot in the parlor. Rhett sat alone with a half-filled glass of bourbon, staring at the fire. He had offered her a future, and now he waited not for thanks, not for romance, but for the one thing he hadn't had in years, hope. The morning came with a breeze that felt cooler than usual, despite the warm sunlight spilling across the fields. Clara noticed it the moment she stepped onto the porch with the laundry basket in hand. Something in the wind felt off, still, back. Inside the ranch house, her mama hadn't stirred. That wasn't new. Sarah had been sleeping longer these days, but something about the silence in the room made Clara's stomach twist. She set the basket down and crossed to the bedside. Mama? She whispered. No response. Clara bent low, touching her mother's forehead. It was warm, too warm, and slick with sweat. Her lips were dry, cracked, and her chest rose with shallow, rapid breaths. Panic clawed at Clara's throat. She ran by. Noon, the doctor had arrived dusty, frowning, and exhausted from the long ride from town. Red had sent for him the moment Clara knocked on his study door with tears in her eyes. The doctor's diagnosis was grim. The fever's flaring again, he said quietly to Red and Clara on the porch. She doesn't have much strength left to fight it. You need to prepare yourselves. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, but she was getting better. The doctor laid a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes it comes back harder. There's nothing you could have done differently. She nodded numbly. That night, Clara didn't leave her mama's side. She wiped her forehead gently with a damp cloth. She spooned water to her lips when she could. She whispered stories from when she was a child, days by the creek, dances in the kitchen, songs they used to hum together when the world felt kinder. The fire crackled low. The rest of the house was still. Then, just past midnight, Sarah stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, faint, glassy, but aware. Clara, she rasped. I'm here, Clara said quickly, kneeling beside her. I'm right here, Mama. Her mama's hand found hers. You've done so good, baby. So strong. Don't talk like that, Clara whispered, choking on the lump in her throat. You're gonna pull through. You always do. But Sarah smiled, and it broke Clara's heart. No, sweetheart. My time's come. I can feel it, and that's all right. Clara shook her head. It's not all right. I'm not ready. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. Sarah squeezed her hand weakly. Because I've seen the way you look at this land now. The way you carry yourself. You've become something I never could have dreamed of, and you ain't alone anymore. Clara swallowed hard. Rhett McAllister, her mama continued. He's not just offering you a roof and a wage. He's offering you respect. And maybe love, in time. Clara's voice shook. I don't know if I'm ready for all that. You don't have to be, but promise me something. Clara nodded, tears falling freely now. Don't shrink, Clara. Don't play small just to keep quiet. Take the life you've earned, and don't apologize for it. Not to the men who doubt you. Not to the women who whisper, and not to yourself. I promise, Clara whispered. Her mama's hand loosened slightly. I'm proud of you, she murmured. So proud. And then her breath slowed and stopped. The sky was just turning pale with morning when Clara stepped outside the ranch house. She stood in the yard, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes locked on the horizon. The earth felt too still, too quiet. Behind her, the door opened. Rhett stepped out, his hat in his hands. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Clara turned to him, her face streaked with tears. She's gone. He nodded, his voice low and gentle. I'm so sorry. She hesitated, then said she wanted me to stay. He looked at her, brows furrowed. She told me to stop hiding, to take what I've earned, to live the life I want. And what life is that? He asked softly. I don't know, she admitted, but I think it might start here. Rhett stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Whatever you decide, Clara Mae, you've got a place here, for as long as you want it. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, but in her heart, she already knew the answer. The girl who had once taken her mama's place in a ranch kitchen was becoming something more, something stronger, something her mama would have been proud of, and soon something no one on Dry Creek Ranch would be able to ignore. The house felt different without Mama in it. Even with the windows open and the morning sun flooding the floorboards, a hush clung to every room, a silence filled with awe. The things Clara wished she could still say, but grief didn't stop the ranch from running, and neither would she. Clara stood before the mirror that morning, smoothing the front of her plain dress with steady hands. It wasn't anything special, just clean, pressed cotton, but it felt different today, like armor. Like a signal, she wasn't just the cook anymore. She was the woman of the house now, and she was going to act like it. The first thing she did was change how meals were served. Instead of letting the men straggle in whenever they pleased, she rang the old brass triangle at set times, once for breakfast, once for supper. She organized a chart for supplies, listing what they had, what was low, and what needed to be ordered before the week's end. She met with Red after lunch to go over the books. He seemed surprised at first, then impressed, didn't expect. You to take over all the ledgers, he said, setting aside his hat. Well, someone had to do it, she replied, eyes scanning the page. You've got 4 accounts that haven't been settled in months. I can write to them if you'd like. His brows rose. You'd be willing to handle that? Clara looked up. I'm not asking for permission, Mr. McAllister. I'm asking how far you're ready to let me go. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All the way, Clara Mae. You've earned it. Later that day, she met with the foreman and 2 of the more trusted ranch hands in the kitchen. She handed them fresh ledgers, copies of the new inventory system, and a rotating schedule for barn duties. Rhett approved it, she said simply, placing the papers on the table. Any issues, you come to me. There was a pause. Then Hank, the older hand who'd always been kind to her, tipped his hat. You running a tighter ship than we've seen in years. One of the younger cowboys muttered, This ranch is getting run by a girl now? Clara leveled her gaze on him. No, it's being run by someone who gives a damn. That shut him up. By the time the sun began to dip low in the sky, the ranch was humming in a new kind of rhythm. Meals were smoother. Chores were more organized. And no one dared cross Clara, not after they saw her stand at the head of the dining room and call out that anyone disrespecting the kitchen, the hands, or the house would report straight to Rhett and her. But the strangest moment came just before supper. Rhett stood at the bottom of the staircase as Clara descended, clipboard in hand, her hair braided neatly, sleeves rolled. You've done more in one day than I managed in a season, he said with a half smile. I just got tired of everything being halfway done, Clara replied. He nodded slowly. You've become someone this place listens to. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in days. I only want to make this a place worth staying. It already is, he said, then paused. You made it that. Clara felt something shift in the space between them, quiet but undeniable. Not obligation. Not gratitude. Something warmer. That evening, she sat on the front porch alone, watching the prairie turn gold as the sun dipped low. The wind tugged at her dress and carried the scent of wild sage and pine. Her mama had once said, when a woman takes ownership of her place, she changes the land beneath her feet. Clara didn't fully understand it then, but now she did. She'd walked into this ranch as a desperate girl with burnt biscuits and shaking hands. Now, She was its heart, not by demand, not by title, but by presence. And Red, who had once only seen her as the cook's daughter, was beginning to see something much more. Clara didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There were still challenges ahead, whispers to silence, men to win over. But tonight, Dry Creek Ranch ran under her watchful eye, and she was ready for whatever came next. The wind carried dust again. Clara knew that kind of wind. It was hot, sudden, and came before bad news. She stood on the porch, apron dusted with flour, arms folded tight across her chest. Her eyes narrowed as a lone rider crested the hill beyond. The pasture fast slouched low, with a posture she hadn't seen in weeks but would never forget. Jed Talbert. He'd come back. She didn't move. Rhett was in the far barn, checking fencing supplies, when one of the younger cowhands galloped up, breathless. "Boss, Yet's back. He's coming up the trail, and he don't look friendly." Rhett didn't ask questions. He grabbed his rifle and mounted his horse without a word. By the time Jed rode into the yard, Clara was waiting. No one had told her to. No one expected her to. But this was her house now, her home, and she wasn't about to let a bitter man ride in and take away what she had bled and cried to earn. Jed pulled up hard, boots hitting the ground with a thud. His face was twisted into that same sneer. "Well," he drawled, "you've sure gone and made yourself comfortable, haven't you, girl?" Clara didn't blink. "Get back on your horse." He laughed, spitting in the dirt. "What are you gonna do? Hit me with a biscuit tray?" She stepped off the porch, calm and steady. "If you're here to threaten me again, know that I don't scare easy, not anymore." "You think running the kitchen makes you the queen of this place?" he snapped. "I built fences here while you were still playing with dolls. And I've run this ranch cleaner in 2 weeks than you ever did in 2 years, she shot back. His jaw tightened. "You've got no right." "I've got every right," Clara interrupted, voice rising. "Because I stayed. I worked. I stood my ground when men like you tried to shove me back into the shadows." Jed took a step forward, but that's when Rhett appeared, riding fast, rifle resting across his saddle. The sight of him brought the entire yard to a hush. "You heard her," Rhett said coldly. "Get on your horse and leave." Yet's eyes darted between them. "So that's how it is now? She speaks, and you jump?" "No," Rhett said, dismounting. "But she earned her place here." "You lost yours." Yet's mouth twisted. "This ain't over, McAllister. You're gonna regret choosing her over your men." "I didn't choose her over anyone," Rhett said evenly. "I chose what was right." Jed looked at Clara one last time, something dark flashing in his eyes, then spat near her feet and mounted his horse. "This ranch'll eat her alive," he called over his shoulder. Clara didn't flinch. "Then I'll bite back." He rode off. And this time no one followed. That night, the bunkhouse was quieter than usual. A few men ones who'd once questioned Clara's place walked up to her after supper. Hank tipped his hat. "That was a fine thing you did, Miss Clara. Took guts." Another hand added, "Never seen someone stare Jed down like that. Not even Rhett." Clara just nodded, grateful, but didn't linger. She didn't want applause. She wanted order. And it was holding. Later, Rhett found her on the back porch. The stars were out, the land stretching wide and quiet under the night sky. "You didn't have to face him alone," he said. She looked at him. "I wanted to." He stepped closer. "You were fearless." "I was scared out of my skin," she admitted. "But I couldn't let him think this place was up for the taking." Rhett studied her face. "It's not while you're here." "Ah." Long pause passed between them. "Clara," he said gently, "when I offered you a place here, I didn't expect you to rise the way you did. But every day you prove me wrong in the best possible way." She smiled, just slightly. "I'm not finished rising yet." He chuckled. "I don't believe you ever will." Clara turned back to the stars. Trouble had returned. But this time, she hadn't run. She had stood her ground with nothing but her voice, her resolve, and the hard-won respect of a rancher who now looked at her not as a girl, but as an equal dot, maybe more dot, and tomorrow? Tomorrow she'd wake early, ring the bell, and keep leading, because Dry Creek Ranch wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. The prairie was silver with morning mist, and the sky hadn't yet turned gold when Clara stepped out onto the porch, shawl tight around her shoulders. She couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the stillness after days of tension. Or maybe it was something deeper, something shifting inside her she hadn't quite put a name to yet. Dry Creek Ranch had changed since she arrived, and so had she. The kitchen girl, the cook's daughter, the desperate girl holding her mother's hand in a leaky cabin, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd fought for her space, claimed it, and earned every ounce of respect with grit and grace. Behind her, the house was calm. Her mama's old room was empty now, and though it still ached, Clara had found peace there. Not sorrow, just memory. Sweet and strong. She was thinking of that when she heard the soft crunch of boots behind her. Rhett, that he didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, watching the horizon. "Didn't think you'd be up this early," Clara said softly. "Didn't think you would," he replied, then glanced sideways, "though I should have." They stood in silence a moment. Then he cleared his throat. "I've been working on something." For a while now. Clara looked over. He wasn't holding papers. Not a list. Not a ledger. Just a small weathered box in one hand. Her breath caught. "I had this made," Rhett said, opening the lid. Inside sat a silver band, simple, elegant, with a small turquoise stone pressed into the center. Didn't want anything too fancy. Just something honest. Clara stared, her heart thundering in her chest. "I didn't know if it was too soon," he said, "or too much. I didn't want you to feel bound. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. I figured maybe someone should want to take care of you properly." Clara felt the wind still around her, not because she didn't expect it, but because hearing him, was different. Rhett wasn't a man of many words. He didn't offer softness easily, but he'd always offered truth, and that's what she heard in his voice now. Not desperation, not duty. Just truth. "You already gave me more than I ever expected," Clara whispered. "You believed in me. You backed me. You let me be more than just what I was born into." Rhett looked down, his voice low. "You were always more, Clara. I just gave you the space to see it." She reached forward, her fingers brushing the silver ring. "And if I take this," she asked gently, "what kind of life are we building?" Rhett didn't hesitate. "A shared one. You don't stop being you. You don't stop running this house, or speaking your mind, or making this ranch better every day. I'm not asking you to become someone new." He stepped closer. "I'm asking if you'll stand beside me, not behind. As a partner, as my wife." Lump rose in Clara's throat. She thought of her mama's voice. "Don't shrink. Don't apologize for living big." And suddenly, she wasn't afraid anymore. She nodded, her voice steady. "Yes." Rhett's eyes softened with something deeper than relief. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his finger, hand trembling just slightly, and when he leaned forward to kiss her forehead, Clara closed her eyes, not because she needed to, because she wanted to. That afternoon, the news spread across the ranch faster than a prairie fire. Some were shocked. Others smiled quietly. Hank slapped Rhett on the back and gave Clara a hug so strong she nearly lost her breath. By supper, it was official. She sat at the head of the long table next to Rhett, overseeing a meal she no longer had to cook, surrounded by cowhands who looked at her not with doubt, but pride. And as the sun set over Dry Creek, Clara stood on the porch again, only this time with Rhett beside her, his arm around her waist and a future stretched out wide before them. She had walked into this ranch as a girl with calloused hands, burnt biscuits, and no plan but survival, but she had earned every ounce of what came after: title, a home, a husband who stood beside her with quiet strength, and a life she never dared to dream out because in the end, Red hadn't just offered her a deal. He offered her a place to belong. And Clara Mae? She took it with both hands and never looked back.